On March 21st, 2017, a horrifying discovery was made in Washington, D.C. 16-month-old Rhythm Fields was found cold, lifeless, and unresponsive in her playpen. Her mother, Faneshia Scott, would eventually face justice for her daughter's death, but the path to conviction would take more than 8 years and reveal a disturbing pattern of violence against her children. My name is Cameron. Welcome to True Red Crime. Now, the events of that March afternoon began innocuously enough. A friend of Faneshia, who was also Rhythm's godmother, stopped by the apartment with her 8-year-old child. The child wanted to play with the toddler. When the child asked to see Rhythm, Faneshia went to check on her daughter in the playpen, but what she found would set motion a criminal investigation. It would span nearly a decade. Now, Rhythm was unresponsive and cold to the touch. In a panic, Faneshia ran outside, flagged down a mail carrier who immediately called 911. The mail carrier followed Faneshia back into the apartment and observed Rhythm lying on the couch, completely lifeless. The child's body was cold, her body was stiff, and her eyes were fixed. Clear signs she'd been dead for some time. While still on the phone with the 911 operator, the mail carrier attempted to follow instructions for emergency care. 2 other individuals entered the residence to administer CPR, including an experienced former firefighter. This firefighter knew immediately upon seeing Rhythm that the child was already dead. First responders who arrived at the scene were surprised to learn that Faneshia claimed she had not had any contact with her daughter since 9 a.m. that morning, more than 5 hours before Rhythm was discovered. The child was officially pronounced dead at the scene. So on March 22nd, the day after Rhythm's death, the DC Medical Examiner's Office performed an autopsy on the toddler's remains. The findings were deeply disturbing and would not be officially ruled upon until February 5th, 2018. The medical examiner determined the manner of death was homicide and that the cause of death was multiple blunt force injuries. The autopsy revealed contusions and abrasions covering her head, neck, torso, and extremities. She had suffered a subdural hemorrhage, bleeding between the brain and skull, as well as cerebral edema, subarachnoid hemorrhage, and acute hyperischemia. Did I say that correctly? Probably not. But all of this indicated severe trauma to the brain. And the question you got to ask yourself is, Faneshia, what on earth did you do to this child and why? The child also had retinal and optic nerve sheath hemorrhages. Perhaps most shocking though was 23 bilateral rib fractures. The medical evidence showed that these fractures were at different stages of healing, indicating both old and new injuries. Some ribs had begun to heal, suggesting earlier incidents of mistreatment, while others were fresh, pointing to recent trauma. But this pattern of injuries at various stages of healing would become crucial evidence in establishing a timeline of ongoing mistreatment. And as the investigation progressed and the case eventually went to trial, prosecutors presented evidence of months-long timeline of alleged mistreatment against Rhythm at the hands of her mother. Faneshia, a mother of 3 children, allegedly struck her children regularly, according to witness testimony. This wasn't limited to Rhythm alone. Faneshia faced 7 counts of first-degree child cruelty, in addition to the murder charges, suggesting that her other children had also suffered because of her. Witnesses testified to specific incidents of violence, and prosecutors claimed Faneshia had violently shaken Rhythm on March 20th, just 1 day before the death. This is because she kept crying. You know, this morning, my daughter, she was crying like crazy. She's a little bit sick. You know what I did? I just held her and I walked with her for like 30 minutes. Just walked her around the living room. My back was killing me because I'm a fat bastard. But that's what you do when a child is crying. You don't shake them, you muppet. Now, a witness who saw Rhythm after this incident alleged that the child looked unwell at the time. Less than 24 hours later, Rhythm would be unalived. The prosecution's case also revealed that Faneshia had received repeated warnings about her treatment of children. Family members, neighbors, and even police had previously expressed concerns and offered help. But the mistreatment persisted for weeks and ultimately led to Rhythm's death. Despite these interventions and offers of assistance from loved ones, the violence continued. So Faneshia was arrested and charged with first-degree cruelty to children and 2 counts of first-degree murder. Now, while the victim was especially vulnerable due to the age, remarkably, Faneshia was released on bond, if you can believe it, and remained free while awaiting trial. But during her time on release, Faneshia violated court orders designed to protect her surviving children. So, prosecutors asserted she had made unauthorized contact with her older children without the custodian's consent and supervision. More troublingly, according to the custodian, she had discussed the case with the children. She went up to her surviving children and she said the baby died choking on a grape, a version of events that contradicted the medical evidence. This was reportedly Faneshia second violation of orders relating to her children. As a result, DC Superior Court Judge Jason Park issued a stay-away order prohibiting all contact between Scott and her children. When the case finally went to trial, Faneshia's defense attorney, Stephen Kirsch, attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's evidence. He suggested that the rib fractures could have been caused by CPR administered during the rescue attempts, rather than mistreatment. Kirsch argued that prosecutors lacked sufficient evidence to prove his client had unalived her daughter, and urged the jury not to let emotions cloud their judgment. The law that you have to follow is not an emotional law, he told the jurors. However, the jury was not persuaded by his arguments. The combination of the autopsy findings, particularly the rib fractures at different stages of healing, witness testimony about ongoing mistreatment, and the circumstances of Rhythm's death proved overwhelming. The jury found Faneshia, at the time 39, guilty of first-degree felony murder. On October 24th, Judge Jason Park sentenced Faneshia to 41 years in prison, 11 years above the mandatory 30. The sentencing hearing was deeply emotional, with family members delivering impact statements that expressed both grief and, remarkably, forgiveness. Rhythm's grandparents spoke tearfully, saying, "Rhythm deserved to grow up with her brothers and sisters. I will never hear her call me Grandma again." She implored Faneshia to apologize, saying, "All we want to hear is for you to say sorry." The godmother, who had been present at the tragic day, described Rhythm as the light of our life and said she remained haunted by the lost images of Rhythm. She noted Faneshia had not taken accountability and asked for a life sentence without parole. Now check this out, this is actually insane. Prosecutors had argued for a 51-year sentence, adding an extra year for each of the rib fractures. Imagine that. The injuries were so bad that you get an extra year per injury per bone. Have you heard anything like it? They emphasized that this was not a typical felony murder case, but one involving repeated mistreatment towards children. The prosecution described how Rhythm had been left in a pack and play to die. The defense requested the 30-year only, noting that prosecutors had previously offered a plea deal of 15 years and argued 51 years would effectively be a life sentence. That's the least she deserves, you idiot. Defense attorneys Megan Alban and Steve Kirsch described her as a God-fearing woman who had been a light in her prison unit. When I did the research for this, when I read that they literally went to court, they had the audacity, they had the bollocks to say she's a God-fearing woman. They requested she be allowed to write to her surviving children who could decide whether to have a relationship with her once they turned 18. Faneshia's parents were present in the courtroom, and before sentencing, Faneshia addressed the court through tears. She asked for mercy and expressed her desire to maintain a relationship with her children. At the conclusion of the hearing, the court's stay-away order was dropped, allowing Faneshia to reach out to the children's grandmother, who had custody, to determine if communication would be permitted. I'm going to move on to the next story, but Faneshia, the minimum time you should stay in prison is until you're 80. Before I move on to my other stories, I got a quick case. I've just got the crime scene photos for them. I've waited ages. April 27th, 2010. It's around 4:30 p.m. Jacksonville Fire and Rescue received an urgent 911 call. This was an apartment complex on Prudential Drive in Florida. The caller reported that a young child was unresponsive, vomiting and convulsing. Rescue rushed to the scene and found the toddler in critical condition. And despite their best efforts, he was rushed to the hospital, but he was pronounced dead at 5 p.m. His name was Dante Jr. Initially, the cause of death appeared to be cardiac arrest, but this preliminary assessment would soon be challenged by disturbing evidence. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because Dante Dawson Sr., the father, is the main perpetrator, but I do have his police interview, so I'll put the link in the description. I'll give you some more details now, and after you watch all this video, click that link, go watch the police interview. The entire problem is that the boy had a lacerated liver, a lacerated spleen, cracked ribs, and a fractured skull. He was also vomiting out the food he ate earlier. So how did all of this happen? Well, according to Dante, he was playing with the child. and he threw his child onto the bed, not realizing how much he was hurting the child. Now, the boy is only 16 months old, but I have kids myself. If I was to fling my daughter onto the bed, it may be painful, but it's not going to do anything to her liver or her spleen. You see what I'm saying? It wasn't until the mother came back home for work and she discovered the boy vomiting with blood on his lips and tongue. See, when the doctors performed the autopsy, what they discovered contradicted the narrative that they were just playing on the bed. The doctor observed multiple internal and external injuries. He immediately deemed suspicious based on the family's statements, and the injuries were extensive and horrifying. As I said, contusions, hematomas across the child's body, broken rib, lacerated liver, and he also had a skull fracture under the scalp. These were not injuries consistent with the child simply taking a nap and experiencing a medical emergency or just playing on the bed. These injuries were consistent with physical trauma. So Dante Dawson Sr. was brought in for questioning, and as I said, you can see that entire interview in the link. So let me move on to the next story, watch all this video, and go ahead, check that video out. Now, in case number 2, late October 2025, a case unfolded in Opelousas, Louisiana. It involved the death of a 2-month-old infant girl. This infant was the daughter of Kelly Fontenot and Taylor Broussard. The infant was found lifeless on October 25, 2025, triggering an immediate investigation. This would soon reveal a case of severe mistreatment and neglect. Now, authorities were alerted when the infant was discovered not breathing at the home, where Kylie and Taylor had exclusive custody since birth. Emergency medical responders rushed the baby to a hospital, but despite efforts to save her, she was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Forensic pathologists conducted a thorough autopsy. This uncovered shocking details about the infant's condition at the time of death. The cause was determined to be complications from severe inflicted injuries and significant neglect. Findings included extreme dehydration, malnourishment, and extensive mistreatment. Specific injuries noted, again, there were multiple broken ribs showing signs of healing, which again showed evidence of prolonged trauma. Most notably, the infant suffered a severed lower spine, an injury described as exceptionally severe and rare. Yeah, that sounds painful. Which caused internal bleeding in the pelvic area and was directly linked to her fatal condition. The autopsy report formed the cornerstone of the case against Kaylee and Taylor. Both were quickly identified as persons of interest and faced criminal charges. Kaylee was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Tyler initially evaded immediate arrest. However, he turned himself in as the investigation progressed and was charged with the same crimes. Police revealed Kaylee and Tyler had been the sole custodians of their daughter throughout her short life. The case portrayed a disturbing picture of ongoing neglect rather than an isolated incident. Background information on Kaylee portrays her as a young mother living in the area. Limited public information exists about her prior history or family circumstances. But despite the lack of information and the lack of images of the child, her story had to be told. Similarly, Taylor's background was also investigated by police for signs of past aggression or neglectful behavior. The couple's relationship and environment came under scrutiny as the investigation unfolded. Details from the police reports describe the infant's health decline over weeks before her death, consistent with chronic neglect and abuse. The infant's deteriorating condition went unnoticed or unreported long enough to result in catastrophic injuries. That's all the information I have, but the reason why I told you that story is because how many of you know that Kaylee and Tyler, what happened to their child? In many ways, when telling the story, it hurts more given the lack of information, because we'll never know how the child smiled, how it cried, what foods it liked, it didn't like, and while their case is ongoing, these two muppets deserve to be in prison forever. Now to my final story. Now, this is a story of manipulation, jealousy, and fatal confrontation. It's a case where text messages became evidence, where lies led to murder, and where one woman orchestrated a killing without ever pulling the trigger. This is a story of how Vanessa K. Williamson and Robert Lee James gunned down Daniel Kellerwan in what prosecutors would call a cold-blooded, premeditated murder disguised as self-defense. Our story begins October 2009 in Sacramento, California, a cannabis club where Vanessa met Daniel Kellerwan. What started as a friendship quickly evolved into a casual, romantic relationship. Kellerwan worked as a driver, delivering prescription medications and medical supplies from a warehouse in Sacramento. He delivered them to 3 medical facilities between Williams and Redding. It seemed like a straightforward job, transporting necessary medications to those who needed them. At some point, Vanessa started accompanying Kellerwan on his delivery routes. She would share the driving responsibilities, and in return, he would pay her for her help. It appeared to be a mutually beneficial arrangement. He got assistance with the long drives, she earned money. But by the end of November 2009, Vanessa made a significant decision. She moved from Sacramento to Redding. According to her own account, she made this move to be closer to her family and to get away from Kellerwan. She claimed he was pressuring her to move in with him in Sacramento. Whether this was the truth or simply a convenient narrative she would later use, we'll never know. Now, around the time of her move to Redding, Vanessa starting a romantic relationship with Chris Kingsley, whom she had met through a social networking site. While Vanessa considered Kingsley to be her boyfriend, she continued her relationship with Kellerwan. When asked about this by her mother, Vanessa explained she was just trying to make him happy so he would give her money. And give her money he did. While dating Kellerwan, Vanessa received approximately $1,000 from him over a period of time. $1,000 a month or something like that. $500 of this was because of the driving routes. The rest was simply gifts. He brought her clothes, paid for her to get hair and nails and all that stuff done, got her food, cigarettes and marijuana. He even gave her daughter a video game system as a Christmas present. Kellerwan was clearly invested in this relationship, showering Vanessa with gifts and money hoping to maintain their connection. But Vanessa's relationship with Kingsley came to an abrupt end when Kingsley discovered a sexual text message she had received from another man named Elliot Fitzgerald. So this silly cow Vanessa, she's got Kellerwan, she's got Kingsley, and now this other guy called Elliot. But the men don't end there. The same day her relationship with Kingsley died, Vanessa reconnected with a former boyfriend, his name Robert Lee James, and this reconnection would prove fatal. James would shoot Daniel Kellerwan to death. In the week leading up to Kellerwan's death, Vanessa and James saw each other every single day. They spent nearly every night together at James's father's house where James was living. James later admitted he felt like he loved her. It was a whirlwind romance, intense and all-consuming. 2 or 3 days before the shooting, Vanessa told James about Kellerwan. She described him as someone she had been working for as a pill courier, but said that the arrangement would be ending because Kellerwan would no longer be delivering to Redding. She added that Kellerwan had changed his route specifically to deliver to Redding when she moved there, and she felt like he was stalking her. As usual, Vanessa was telling porky pies. When James asked whether Kellerwan was her boyfriend, Vanessa was quick to answer that their relationship was strictly professional. Haha, $1,000 professional, huh? This was a lie, one of many she would tell James in the days leading up to the murder. Now, the day before the shooting, Vanessa and James talked about Kellerwan again. When James asked about the delivery route, Vanessa made a shocking suggestion. She said, "Why don't we rob him? We could take all the medications." James asked what would be in the delivery. Vanessa had all the details ready. She told him there would be sealed packages containing prescription medication, either in Kellerwan's back seat or in the trunk of his car. She also mentioned Kellerwan would be carrying about $1,500 in cash and would have a gun in the car. Because of this, she said they would need to be armed if they were going to rob him. Now James, he considered the proposal, but he said no, telling Vanessa Kellerwan will probably suspect that it was her that did it, since she knew where the route was. And for now, the plan was shelved. But the seed to go after Kellerwan had been planted. On January 8, 2010, the day that would end in murder, Vanessa and James drove to a pharmacy to pick up Vanessa's prescription. While the medication was prescribed for a knee injury, Vanessa didn't actually take it. Instead, she sold the pills. This detail is important because James was addicted to prescription pain medication. He primarily took OxyContin, a more powerful narcotic. In fact, Oxy has devastated American communities. Now, after picking up the prescription, Vanessa gave James 5 pills to alleviate the withdrawal symptoms from Oxy. They spent the afternoon and early evening running various errands, including 2 stops at the motel where Vanessa's family was staying. They took occasional breaks to smoke marijuana and eventually returned to James's house, where they poured themselves drinks. Throughout the day, Vanessa was constantly on her cell phone, sending and receiving text messages. As the night progressed, she was doing so continuously. These messages would later become crucial evidence in understanding what really happened that night. Meanwhile, Daniel was driving his delivery route from Sacramento to Redding. He left the warehouse in Sacramento around 6 p.m. Earlier in the day, he and Vanessa had exchanged a series of text messages. They were talking about a message Kellerwan had received 2 weeks earlier. Apparently, some woman sent him some nudes. Cheeky boy. Kellerwan apologized for his stupidity, insisted that the nude picture was the furthest it went, and asked Vanessa to go back with him to Sacramento that night, to which Vanessa said no. But have a look at the dynamic. Vanessa knows that she's cheating on him or playing him because she's got James, or Elliot, or Kingsley, or whoever the fuck. Kellerwan, however, he made a mistake with this woman, but he was still under the impression that they were together. You see the dynamic? And Vanessa kept playing with him. He told her, come back with me to Sacramento. She said no. Then she said maybe. Then she said no. And later on that evening, after finding the nude photo, she told Kellerwan to have sex with whomever he wanted because she didn't care. He said, don't do this. She said, well, I'm gonna go and have oral sex with someone else. Damn, that's gotta hurt Kellerwan, huh? He responded, fine. But then he wanted all his money back. And even though he's a victim, that's kind of petty in my opinion. He wanted all the money he spent on her hair, all the money he spent on her food, on her nails, and the Christmas gift he got for her daughter. By this point, Kellerwan was a delivery stop in Red Bluff. The nurse who signed for the medications testified he seemed down in the dumps and he was on his cell phone, and when she asked him, hey, what's wrong with you? He said, I'm having problems with my girlfriend. She is breaking up with me. He was clearly heartbroken, dealing with the emotional pain of a relationship falling apart. Now back in Redding, after having a drink in the kitchen, James went into his bedroom and took 5 more pills, leaving Vanessa to her text messaging. Then came the moment that would set everything in motion. Vanessa received a text message from Kellerwan. This said, I want hair, all nails, and your little one's Xmas gift. Basically, Kellerwan said, I want the money for everything I paid for. She then started screaming, he's going to kill my baby. James rushed to Vanessa to calm her down and asked what she meant. She explained Kellerwan had sent her a text saying he wanted her daughter's hair and nails. James thought this was creepy, but that's because Vanessa had deliberately misinterpreted the message. Kellerwan wasn't threatening her daughter, he was simply saying he wanted the money back, but Vanessa twisted his words to make James believe her child was in danger. Kellerwan then sent additional text messages demanding the money more and more and saying he would be at the motel where her family lived in 15 minutes. Vanessa responded she wasn't at the motel, and Kellerwan replied that her family would be there, including her daughter. Vanessa showed these messages to James and said, let's go to the motel, I want to protect my daughter, and told James to bring a gun. James asked whether she was sure. Then he grabbed a semi-automatic handgun along with a clip and a handful of bullets from his father's bedroom. And as they were leaving the house, Vanessa also mentioned Kellerwan wanted money back for the things he paid for, but insisted she had earned that money. James, you poor sucker. Vanessa and James took Vanessa's car to the motel. James drove while Vanessa loaded the bullets into the gun. At James' request, she placed the magazine in the glove compartment and put the gun under the passenger's seat. They were now armed and heading towards a confrontation. On the way to the motel, Kellerwan called Vanessa. She answered the phone and immediately started yelling, "You're not going to fuck with my family. We have a gun too." Kellerwan was cussing and yelling back. James kept telling him, "I'm going to kill you." And at that point, the phone call ended. According to Vanessa's account, provided during her first trial, Kellerwan said that he was going to kill her family and that he was going to blow up the motel and shoot the windows out. This was her justification for what would happen next. But there's crucial detail here. They drove past a police station on the way to the motel, and James later admitted he considered stopping there to inform the police about Kellerwan's purported threat to kill Vanessa's daughter. But he explained it just seemed more important to get down to the motel first. If they truly believed a man was on his way to murder a child, why wouldn't they stop at the police station they were literally driving past? You see the point? When they arrived at the motel, Vanessa retrieved the gun and clip, combined the two, and got out of the car with the gun in her hand, hidden beneath her shirt. James asked Vanessa what she was doing and took the gun from her and placed it in his waistband. But here's the thing, Callowon's car was not in the parking lot. He hadn't stopped by Vanessa's family motel room. There was no threat. There was no danger. No man with a gun coming to harm a child. Inside the motel room, James told Vanessa's father that they should probably move to a different motel. Vanessa's father responded, "We're not going anywhere." James then lifted his shirt to show he had a gun, using the slang term, strap. More text messages were exchanged between Callowon and Vanessa. Vanessa told Callowon she was at the room and asked where he was. Between repeated demands for the money he had given Vanessa and some vulgar insults, Callowon responded he was across the street. Vanessa and James returned to the car and drove across the street. This time, Vanessa drove while James sat in the passenger seat with the gun. But Callowon wasn't there either. Then Vanessa made another suggestion. She told James she might know where Callowon would be, based on the location of his last delivery stop, and she brought up the robbery plan again, saying they could rob him and scare him out of town. This time, James decided to go along with the idea. He later explained he thought he was protecting her family and her daughter. Vanessa had successfully manipulated him into believing that robbing Callowon at gunpoint was somehow an act of protection. Vanessa then drove towards Callowon's last stop for the night, a skilled nursing facility about 2 miles from the motel. They found Callowon about a block from the facility as he drove through an intersection. Vanessa said, "That's him. That's his car." She then followed Callowon around the block and pulled up beside his car, positioning herself in the oncoming lane of traffic. Both cars accelerated. At the next intersection, Callowon's car spun out on the wet roadway, coming to a stop in the middle of the road, positioned perpendicular to the path of travel. Vanessa also stopped, positioning her car 45-degree angle to Callowon's car. This placement put James directly across from Callowon, a perfect shooting position. Vanessa's car came closer to the stop. James saw something in Callowon's hand and opened fire. He fired a total of 5 rounds in rapid succession. One of the bullets struck Callowon in the back, traveled through his chest cavity, and penetrated his heart. Despite massive internal bleeding, Callowon somehow managed to right his car and drive a short distance before crashing into a neighboring yard. Vanessa and James did not follow through on their plan to rob Callowon. Instead, they drove past his car as it crashed and continued on to James' house, where they spent the night together. Callowon, 28 years old, was dead. Vanessa and James were arrested the next day. While in jail, Vanessa was overheard making some shocking statements. She admitted she had planned to rob Callowon of pills and money, and even more disturbing, she said she had the best night's sleep of her life when Callowon died. During the investigation, family members claimed that James and Vanessa told them Callowon had shot at the couple first and they shot back in self-defense. Vanessa's mother said she was in fear of her life. What was she supposed to do? "I don't know, Mom. Maybe she should have stayed the fuck home." But Reading Police Lieutenant Scott Mabry, he was clear. There was no evidence indicate that Callowon shot at the couple whatsoever. Vanessa and James allegedly told investigators after their arrest that Callowon had been in an argument with Vanessa via cell phone conversations and text messages before the shooting, and that Callowon had threatened members of her family. However, there was another friend, this time one of Callowon's, Ravinesh Pratap. He told officers a very different story. He said Callowon had been talking with him on the phone throughout the day, saying he had been in a fight with Vanessa, whom Pratap described as the victim's girlfriend. He told investigators that Callowon was worried that Vanessa and her cousin, James, not a relative, were going to kill him. Pratap showed officers a text message Callowon had sent before he died. The text message read, "They got guns and they want to fight." Callowon knew he was in danger. He knew they were armed, and he was afraid. So Vanessa and James appeared in Shasta County Superior Court. They didn't enter a plea, and their bail remained at $1 million each. During the hearing, James, who sat several feet away from Vanessa, blew her a kiss. Vanessa's family members had to be told by a bailiff not to try to communicate with her. Now, the prosecutor portrayed Vanessa as a betrayed and vindictive woman, bent on revenge, who manipulated her new boyfriend to kill Callowon. Nothing about this killing was self-defense, the prosecutor said. But Vanessa's defense attorney, Richard Farrell, contradicted the portrayal and painted the victim as a jealous ex-con. He claimed Kellawon desperately wanted to remain her boyfriend. She wanted to end the relationship, but he wouldn't let it go. This was the defense's argument. He said Vanessa felt threatened by Kellawon and was afraid he would hurt her and her family. James had long maintained the shooting was in self-defense, but he changed the complexion of the defense case when he pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 32 years. Now, Vanessa's first trial ended in a mistrial. 11 of 12 jurors believed that she was guilty, but one lone dissenter, the jury's forewoman, was all it took for the judge to declare a mistrial. 4 of the jurors said outside the courthouse they believed Vanessa was guilty of first-degree murder, but the forewoman would not vote to convict her because she felt sorry for her. It was all sympathy. Why would you feel sorry for her? For what? Eventually, during the second trial, Vanessa, 27 years old, was found guilty. The jury deliberated for just 1 hour and 39 minutes before returning with its verdict. She was sentenced to life. At sentencing, Vanessa, who shook and sobbed uncontrollably, claimed to be an innocent victim. "I never wanted anyone to be harmed," she said. She was not the one who pulled the trigger of the gun. "Mr. Robert James is the one that did it," she said. She went on to say, "I just don't understand why everybody's coming down on me. I don't understand why it's all me." But neither judge nor deputy district attorney was moved by her tears and claims of innocence. Both said she had shown no remorse for her crimes. They are tears of pity. Judge Gall agreed, calling Vanessa the mastermind behind a deadly chain of events was accurate. Daniel Kellawon did not deserve this. Gall also said James was simply Vanessa's patsy. She used Mr. James to accomplish her goals. He said she set him up to do her bidding. He was basically sucked into this. The prosecution's theory was that Vanessa was guilty of first-degree murder on either a robbery-murder theory or premeditation and deliberation theory, and that her state of mind was more culpable than James. I agree, despite the fact that James pulled the trigger, because Vanessa fed a lot of lies and misinformation. Finally, this is a chilling case example of manipulation and murder. Vanessa never pulled the trigger, but she orchestrated every step that led to the death. She twisted text messages to make James believe her daughter was in danger. She planted the idea of the robbery. She drove to find Kellawon. She positioned the car from the perfect shot. And when it was over, she slept the best sleep she ever had. Kellawon was a man who made the mistake of falling in love with the wrong woman. He showered her with gifts and money, hoping to maintain their relationship. When she rejected him, he asked for his money back, a request that would cost his life. Robert Lee James was manipulated into committing murder, fed lies and threats that didn't exist, and convinced he was protecting a child who was never in danger. He would spend 3 decades in prison because of this. In the end, I guess justice was served, but 3 families were left to grieve. Kellawon's family, mourning the loss of their son, James's family, watching their son go to prison, and Vanessa's family, including her daughter, left to deal with the consequences of her mother's deadly manipulation. This is a story with no winners, only victims. Thank you for watching. Comment, tell me what you think.